champagne glass didn't just break. It shattered, silencing the entire ballroom of the precipitous Waldorf Astoria. Mark Vance stood over his wife, his face twisted in a sneer that didn't belong in high society. "Look at you." He spat his voice, echoing off the marble walls loud enough for the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies to hear. "You're a stain on this night, a stain on my life. Pack your trash and get out before you embarrass me further." He thought he was clearing the way for his billion-dollar merger. He thought he was finally discarding the dead weight. He didn't know that the trembling woman in the thrift store dress was the only reason he was standing in that room, and he certainly didn't know who was about to walk through those double doors to pick her up. The invitation read, "The Vance Annual Gala. A night of prosperity." For Jessica Vance, however, the heavy cream cardstock felt more like a summons to an execution. She stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master bedroom of their Manhattan penthouse, a sprawling, glass-walled fortress overlooking Central Park. The dress she wore was a simple, dusty blue silk gown. It was vintage something she had found in a small boutique in the West Village years ago. It lacked the sequins, the feathers, and the aggressive branding of the gowns Mark preferred her to wear, but it was the only thing that felt like her. "Are you actually wearing that?" The voice cut through the air like a serrated knife. Jessica didn't flinch. She was used to the tone. She watched in the reflection as Mark Vance adjusted his cufflinks. He was handsome in that sharp, predatory way that Wall Street adored. At 32, Mark was the youngest vice president at Sterling Holloway Financial, a firm known for eating smaller banks for breakfast. "It's elegant, Mark," Jessica said softly, turning to face him. "And it's the color your mother liked." "My mother is in a nursing home in Florida, Jessica. She's not the one I need to impress tonight." Mark snapped, walking past her to grab his Patek Philippe watch from the dresser. He didn't even look at her. "Tonight is about the merger with the Kensington Group. Arthur Kensington is bringing his daughter Jessica." "You remember Jessica?" Jessica felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "I remember her. Jessica Kensington, the woman Mark should have married according to every tabloid and office rumor. She was loud, glistening with diamonds, and the heiress to a shipping empire that could triple Mark's net worth overnight." "Good," Mark said, finally checking his appearance in the mirror, smoothing back his hair. "Jessica is dynamic. She's modern. She knows how to hold a room. Just try not to stand next to her too much. The contrast is jarring." He turned to leave, but paused at the door, his hand on the brass handle. "And Jessica, don't speak about your background. If anyone asks, just smile and sip your drink. No one wants to hear about that small-town library you used to work at. We're selling success tonight, not charity." The door clicked shut. Jessica stood alone in the silence of the multi-million-dollar apartment. Mark had no idea. In the 3 years they had been married, he had never dug deep enough to know the truth. He knew she was an orphan. He knew she lived modestly before they met. He assumed she was a nobody he had saved from a life of mediocrity. She looked down at her hands. They were trembling slightly. She reached for her phone, a slightly older model that Mark constantly ridiculed. There was one unread message from a contact listed simply as SS. "Are you sure you want to go through with this tonight?" L. "I can stop it. I can stop him." Jessica typed back quickly. "Let him show them who he really is first. I need to know." She grabbed her clutch and walked out. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt like a descent into a lion's den. But Jessica straightened her spine. Mark wanted a trophy fine. Tonight he would get a show. But the ending wouldn't be the one he had written. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns. The air smelled of expensive perfume, Chanel No. 5 Baccarat Rouge, and the metallic tang of ambition. Waiters moved like ghosts through the crowd, carrying trays of caviar and vintage Dom Perignon. Mark was in his element. He moved through the crowd with a shark-like grace, shaking hands, clapping shoulders, his laugh practiced and booming. Jessica trailed a few steps behind him, a ghost in blue silk. Every time Mark introduced her, it was with a rushed, dismissive wave. "This is Jessica, and this gentleman is Arthur Kensington, the man of the hour." Arthur Kensington was a large man, with a face flushed from too much scotch. He looked at Jessica for a fraction of a second, dismissed her as irrelevant, and turned his back to continue talking to Mark. "Mark, my boy," Arthur boomed, "the numbers on the Q3 projection look solid, but I need to know you have the stability to handle the Asian markets. It's a ruthless territory." "Ruthless is my middle name, Arthur." Mark grinned, leaning in. "I've cut the dead weight from the sector. I run a tight ship. No distractions." "Speaking of distractions," a silky voice purred from behind them. The crowd parted, and Jessica Kensington stepped forward. She was wearing a dress that looked less like clothing and more like a weapon, crimson-red, backless, and cut dangerously low. Diamonds dripped from her ears and throat. She looked like a flame in a room full of ashes. "Jessica." Mark's voice dropped an octave. A genuine smile, one Jessica hadn't seen in months, lit up his face. "You look devastating." "I try." Jessica smirked, her eyes sliding over Mark before landing on Jessica. Her gaze was pitying, almost amused. "Oh, hello, Jessica. Cute dress, very vintage. Is that polyester?" Jessica smiled politely, though her grip on her clutch tightened. "It's silk, actually. 1950s Dior." Jessica laughed, a tinkling, cruel sound. "Right. From a thrift shop, I assume. Mark told me how much you love bargains." Mark chuckled nervously, eager to side with the power in the room. "Jessica has simple tastes, Jessica. Not everyone is born with your eye for excellence." Jessica felt the heat rise in her cheeks. It wasn't the insult that stung. It was Mark's immediate betrayal. He was selling her out for a laugh, for a tiny scrap of approval from the Kensingtons. "Come on, Mark," Jessica said, looping her arm through his, completely ignoring Jessica's presence. "Daddy wants to introduce you to the senator, over by the bar. You can leave the help here." She didn't mean the waiters. Mark didn't even hesitate. He didn't correct her. He didn't defend his wife. He just looked at Jessica with cold eyes. "Stay here. Don't wander off, and for God's sake, don't drink too much. I don't want to carry you out." They walked away, the red dress and the black tuxedo blending into the crowd of elites. Jessica stood alone near a towering ice sculpture of a swan, feeling the eyes of the other guests on her. They were whispering. They knew. In their world, a wife left standing alone while the husband paraded with an heiress was a dead woman walking. She took a sip of water, her heart pounding. She looked across the room and saw Mark whispering in Jessica's ear. Jessica threw her head back and laughed, placing a hand possessively on Mark's chest. It was then that Jessica saw the text message light up on Mark's phone, which he had left on the high-top table next to her while grabbing a drink. The screen buzzed. "Jessica, when are you going to drop the dead weight? My dad won't sign the deal if you're still tethered to the librarian. He needs a power couple." Jessica watched as Mark returned, picked up the phone, read the message, and looked directly at Jessica across the room. He nodded. The decision had been made. Jessica wasn't just a wife anymore. She was the obstacle, and Mark was about to remove it. The dinner was an elaborate affair. 5 courses each, paired with a wine that cost more than a Honda Civic. The clinking of silver against fine china filled the room. Mark tapped his spoon against his champagne glass. The sharp ting, ting, ting silenced the room. The chatter died down. 200 faces turned toward the head table. Mark stood up, a microphone in hand, looking every bit the master of the universe. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mark began, his voice smooth, projected perfectly through the speakers. "Thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate a record-breaking year for Sterling Holloway. We have conquered markets, we have defied expectations, and tonight we stand on the precipice of a new era with our partners at the Kensington Group." Applause rippled through the room. Arthur Kensington nodded approvingly from the front row. Jessica beamed, blowing a kiss to Mark. Jessica sat 3 seats away from Mark, isolated at the end of the table. She stared at the white tablecloth. "But," Mark continued, his tone shifting to something more somber, more theatrical. "Growth requires sacrifice. To reach the summit, one must travel light. One must shed the things that hold them back." The room went quiet. The metaphor was heavy, clumsy, and cruel. Mark turned his body not toward the audience, but toward Jessica. The spotlight followed him, casting a harsh glare on her face. She blinked, blinded by the light. "Jessica," Mark said, his voice amplified, booming through the ballroom. "We've had a run. But let's be honest with ourselves and with our friends here tonight." He chuckled darkly. "You don't belong here. You never did. Look at you. You're sitting at a table with captains of industry, wearing a dress that smells like mothballs, looking like you're waiting for a bus." A gasp rippled through the crowd. This wasn't just a breakup. This was a public flaying. "Mark, stop," Jessica whispered, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a warning. "Don't do this." "I'm done stopping," Mark shouted, playing to the crowd, seemingly fueled by the adrenaline of his own cruelty. "I'm done pretending that you're my equal. You're a placeholder, Jessica. A mistake I made when I was young and sentimental. But I'm a man now, and I need a woman, not a charity case." He gestured to the security guards standing by the exit. "Escort her out," Mark commanded, pointing a finger at his wife. "She's trespassing on a private celebration." Jessica Kensington was laughing openly now, covering her mouth with a napkin, her eyes dancing with delight. Arthur Kensington looked bored, as if this were just a necessary business transaction. 2 burly security guards in dark suits stepped forward, their faces impassive. They reached for Jessica's arms. "Don't touch me," Jessica said. Her voice was quiet, but it had a steel core that made the nearest guard hesitate. "Get her out of here," Mark roared, slamming his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. "Now I want her gone before dessert is served." Jessica stood up slowly. She smoothed the skirt of her blue vintage dress. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She looked Mark dead in the eyes, her expression unreadable. "You wanted to shed the dead weight, Mark," she said, her voice clear, even without a microphone. "You just did. But you have no idea what else you just threw away." "Go back to the gutter, Jessica," Mark sneered, raising his glass in a mock toast. "I'll send the divorce papers to whatever shelter you check into." The guests laughed, a nervous, sycophantic laughter, led by Jessica. They thought the show was over. They thought the peasant was being discarded and the king was ascending his throne. But then the ground shook. Literally. A low, thrumming vibration resonated through the floorboards of the Pierre Hotel. It was the sound of heavy machinery, of engines, powerful ones. Outside, the screech of tires cut through the ambient city noise. Then the heavy oak doors of the ballroom, which were manned by Mark's private security, were not just opened, they were thrown whatum. The music stopped. The laughter died in everyone's throats. 6 men walked in. They weren't hotel security. They weren't police. They were wearing bespoke tactical suits, earpieces, and the distinct lapel pins of the Grey Line Protection Agency, the highest-end private military security firm in the world, usually reserved for heads of state and royalty. And Mark frowned, stepping down from the podium. "Who the hell are you?" "This is a private event," the lead security officer. A man built like a tank ignored Mark entirely. He scanned the room, his eyes locking onto Jessica. He tapped his earpiece. "Target located. Secure. The Eagle has landed." "Get that out," Mark shouted, marching toward them. "I'll have you arrested." "Do you know who I am?" The lead officer simply extended an arm, stopping Mark in his tracks with the force of a concrete barrier. He didn't even look at Mark. He looked past him toward the open doors. "Mr. Vance," the officer said calmly, "we aren't here for you. You're not high enough clearance." A hush fell over the room so deep you could hear a pin drop. Through the doors walked a man. He was elderly, perhaps in his late 70s, leaning on a cane topped with a silver hawk. He wore a tuxedo that cost more than Mark's annual salary. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were sharp, terrifyingly blue and cold as ice. Arthur Kensington, the billionaire shipping magnate who had ignored Jessica all night, dropped his wine glass. It shattered on the floor, red wine staining the carpet. "My God," Arthur whispered, his face draining of color. "That's Silas Sterling." Mark froze. The name hit him like a physical blow. Silas Sterling, the founder of Sterling Industries, the man who practically owned the banking sector, the energy grid, and half of the real estate in New York. He was a myth, a recluse who hadn't been seen in public for a decade. Why was he here? Mark's mind raced. He must be here for the merger. He must have heard about my success. Mark straightened his tie, a desperate, greedy smile plastering onto his face. He pushed past the security guard, extending his hand. "Mr. Sterling." Mark beamed. "What an honor. I'm Mark Vance. I assume you're here to discuss the Kensington deal, I can assure you." Silas Sterling didn't stop walking. He didn't slow down. He walked right through Mark as if he were a ghost. His shoulder checking Mark so hard, the younger man stumbled back into a waiter. Silas walked straight to the back of the room. Straight to the woman standing alone in the blue dress. The entire room watched in paralyzed shock as the most powerful man in the Western Hemisphere stopped in front of the charity case wife. Silas's cold face melted. His eyes softened with a profound, aching sadness. He dropped his cane and opened his arms. "I'm sorry I'm late, granddaughter." Silas said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I told you he wasn't worth the dust on your shoes." Jessica let out a breath she had been holding for 3 years. She stepped into the old man's embrace. "Hello, grandfather." The silence in the room was deafening. Mark Vance stared, his mouth open, his world crumbling into dust. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel, usually a cacophony of deal-making and clinking crystal, had become a vacuum. The air was sucked out of the room.